Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you've had a fantastic time engaging with all the amazing options offered during this entire Prepared to Learn PD series. My name is Laura Litton, and I'm the Director of Success at Screencastify. And in this session, we are joined by a fantastic panel of Google certified educators who will be sharing their tips and best practices for building community in a hybrid learning model, like we're about to walk into, and adapting their teaching methods to include a mix of both virtual learning and traditional classroom options. And so our four panelists include Tarah Tesmer, who is an instructional technologist, educator, and Google certified trainer from Chicago, Illinois. Frederick Ballew, who is also an educator and a Google certified trainer and innovator from Bloomington, Minnesota. Patricia Flores, who's an innovative global educator, curriculum writer, and presenter from Frisco, Texas. And Leticia Citizen, who's an I4 coach, a presenter, and a Google certified educator from Los Angeles, California. We're going to kick off today's panel with hearing about how each panelist is planning and setting expectations for their students come this fall. So Tarah, would you mind sharing, how are you approaching building classroom culture when you know that there's going to be a mix of both online and in-person instruction?
Yeah, so, coming out of the gate, it's so important that we start the year just building relationships with students, whether we're remote or we're in person, making that our goal and our plan. And in our district, we use a lot of cooperative learning structures, and we focus on building relationships at the start of the year over the first few days. For us, starting the year, it might be the first month of August, and forming teams like that early on in small groups with activities where they can bond with each other in a way that's, socially distant is going to be challenging, but, we're lucky to have a lot of digital tools at our disposal that can help us to, adapt these team builders or structures that help for that cooperative team building. So if you think about things like digital collages that turn into a Find Somebody Who or classmate quiz, or a Four Corners consensus building for norms can occur through Pear Deck or even through Jamboard. And, once you've established these small groups, have them take the time to practice shoulder partner sharing through digital tools in ways that they're going to mimic, conversing when they're remote. And if video, for example, is going to be important for students to practice, maybe do a timed pair share through Screencastify with some sentence starters. That way they're practicing just right away in an authentic way, in a way that's bringing awareness to the digital tool while they're conversing with their peers. And ideally, when you start to establish these routines with the technology, with building relationships early on, you're fostering that safe learning environment, and feeling like you're part of a team right off the bat will ensure for those beginning building blocks of psychological safety. And you're really going to need that in order to feel like part of a team prior to norm building and building expectations together. So that's where I would start, with just making sure your students feel like part of a team at the start of the year.
Absolutely. And Frederick, can you share some of the best practices that you're implementing for setting norms and expectations for this hybrid learning environment?
What Tarah said. No, I have more. I think what's going to be really important, as Tarah mentioned, was starting with the setting expectations early. But I work with 5th grade students primarily because educator, but I teach beginner band. I need to roll these things out very slowly. I don't want them to necessarily be overwhelmed because this is all new for everybody. So the idea here is to set your expectations, but also to be like, okay, we're going to learn one tool today, and we're going to do an I do, you do, we do, or I do, we do, you do sort of thing, where I'm like, this is how we use the tool. Let's do it together. Okay, now you do it and share with a friend. The idea here is to work it in slowly, because this is all overwhelming, not just for the kids, but for us too. So it would be super important to, roll it out slow.
Absolutely. And Patricia, what are some of the norms that you've been using that have been successful in building that classroom culture in this hybrid world?
Definitely norms reduce uncertainties because, we already know how others will behave. So norms will lead a perception of fairness at the same time. So first of all, I would say select one stop for learning for your students. Do not use multiple, because try to gather all your tools in one place. Otherwise, it gets very confusing And I would suggest that a learning management system that will allow you to integrate your online tools within that same platform. Then the students know, like, is your backbone where they know where to go and where to access everything from your course. I usually use Canvas LMS, and I have also used Google Classroom as well. It's just a way for students to feel comfortable going to one place. And obviously, the second thing that I would do, I would definitely like to encourage my students to become educated digital citizens in my course. So empower that responsible technology use, where students understand the digital literacy, not only understanding, how the online text tools to produce the images, video creating, editing, but also to showcase how to approach the different audiences with learning digital portfolios and resources for curation. So those academic goals to match the different audiences are going to be very important in this exchange of digital tools. So becoming digital fluent and able to evaluate and discern the good information from the poor, the fake news versus the real news, is going to be also very important for them to have certain norms from the beginning, so then they will be able to choose for themselves later.
Absolutely. And Leticia, what plans do you have for the first day of learning, or maybe beyond the first day, to ensure that you start that year with the right tone to build that community and classroom culture?
There we go. You're muted. So definitely what others have been saying about like building relationships, setting the tone, right? But I'm a strong believer about like culture eats standards for breakfast kind of things. So that we put the culture before we really try to focus in on the content. And so as a coach, I'm not necessarily with my own classroom, but I'm there to help build the communities worldwide, and then also able to help teachers hone in on what they're doing. So we've got a couple of things that we're starting off with just to like start to build culture in our school. I've set up a flip grid for our entire school for our staff to go in by grade level to share, have the teachers go in, share some information about themselves, so that way our parents and our students can go in and listen, and then maybe add comments as well. And then once we return back to school in 3D, then we can print out those QR codes, and that can be posted in front of the classroom. So that's one way that we're trying to build community. I've also set up a space on Google Classroom just for our teachers to go in, where they're all in there as teachers. So, and then I split it up in topics, so that way they can share lessons and ideas that they have, and they can categorize them specifically to the grade level, so that way other teachers can use those. So if they've got like these fabulous ideas about like how to build culture, especially, not just focusing on that first day, but definitely allow it to happen for several weeks, right? And then we want to continue this throughout the year, where we're checking in with our students and doing these activities where they definitely have a voice to share, and then the idea of allowing them different platforms that allows them to choose and how they want to demonstrate their voice, and then also sharing who they are while we're still learning, and then they're learning from teachers as well. I've also created a back to school wakelet for my teachers to use. And again, one of those topics that's there, it says culture before standards for breakfast kind of thing. And they've got different activities that they can engage our students, whether it's using a Pear deck to like check in with students, creating a book creator type activity where students all go in and have a page to like show who they are, and then the students can comment. That's the other thing too. Not only are these platforms for students to share who they are, but then they can comment on each other and give each other that live feedback from an authentic audience, and so that way they're learning from each other. So we've definitely got some different things in place going on.
It's so impressive to hear about all these plans for team building and bringing out that student voice and planning for successful hybrid classroom cultures. Let's transition into talking about what engagement might look like. Frederick, can you start us off? How are you hoping to gauge whether or not students are actively engaged in learning while in that hybrid setting?
Yeah, that's a good question, especially when, I don't know about the rest of you, but when we went to distance learning in March, that's what we called it in Minnesota, there were a number of students who went, cool, summer started early. And you want to make sure that when we're starting this hybrid model, that there are none of the students are thinking, cool, summer keeps going. You want to make sure that they're really paying attention and actively participating. And I think the best way to do that is accountability, but not to me. They need to be accountable to each other and to have some sort of projects that you put forth that the students are all working on together. And a great way to do that is different PBL, project-based learning, where they have to rely on each other in order to really prove that they're pulling their weight, so to speak. Because I mean, let's be honest, a lot of the kids have learned how to make it look like they're participating without necessarily doing it. And we can usually catch them on it, but the students are definitely going to hone in on that. And if you have them accountable to each other, that's huge. And that's going to be a real great way to be able to tell if they're engaged in the learning.
Yeah, and hopefully continue building that team building aspect. And Patricia, what about you? Are there any additional best practices that you've kind of learned to track that student engagement and learning while you have students participating both in person and online?
Yeah, definitely. I will use Pear Deck for sure, Pear Deck, because to provide interaction and engagement. In my case, I teach world languages. So on the first day, we set the tone of collaboration, respect, and helping students recognize their own benefit from being in my class. So I usually provide, the benefits of learning a new language and why, but then I show a presentation and students will discuss the importance of learning the new language and benefits. So with this presentation, I will be able to just collect their feedback right away. And at the end, they will be able to come up with their own reasons for why they want to learn a new language, besides the reasons of just having to take the course because it's a required course. So just setting the tone first on why they are here in my course. It's just the same way that we did it in both virtual or in person. But definitely it's going to be incredible to have to start that interaction right away with each other. And students will be able, I will be able to provide with polls and gather students' thoughts with real-time results, and then have all those answers right away. That will be able help me to monitor their engagement right away. And also, I provide my students with feedback, during that presentations. And one thing that my students enjoy the most was that I provided also videos that they were able to access on their own time. So I don't have to repeat over and over if I have several sections of the same course, and they can access any time, 24/7, and they can repeat it and watch it again. So also providing just interaction with all the online tools that will really help.
Absolutely. Leticia, what are some of the ideas that you have to recognize student accomplishments in this hybrid model, or when they're all online, fully remote, or in person as well?
Gotta get this right. So one thing that we do school-wide, and that we definitely started once we, went first time remote learning in March, was at our school, we are the Hawthorne Heroes. And so we did an acronym where we broke down what the HERO stand for, which is honorable, engaged, respectful, and then open-minded. And so because, right away, again, as a coach, I'm like, wait a minute, we got to continue what we've been doing in terms of, we're really big into PBIS in our district. And so it's like, how do we then take this that way we can recognize our students? So what I've done is gone on ahead and created this virtual card where I set up a Google form where teachers can go and fill it out. It's very section where it asks, for the student name, and it asks for the teacher's name, and then it asks for their message. And then I set it up so that way it then talks to a Google Doc that I created a certificate. And I also use Bunty to create it and then put it into Google Docs, and then have that form to talk to the doc, and then it automatically generates and it sends it automatically to the student. So we posted that virtual hero card for our teachers to access to sign up to fill it out. We have it housed on our Google Classroom for our teachers. And then we also have them for our teachers, so we can send each other virtual hero cards as well. And then we also set up virtual birthday cards, because at our school we used to do weekly celebrations where we would come together as a school and like really recognize our birthdays and everything. So again, it was like, how do we do this virtually? Let's go set it up. So I set up a whole autocrat where it automatically sends it to the students, and it's nice to get their responses. And the card goes directly to the student, to their parent email, and then also to the teacher, so that way they know it was sent. But it's nice to see the responses from the kids where they'll like send it to me and they're like, thanks so much, Mrs. Citizen. I'm like, yeah, I'll make sure to let your teacher know. So that's really been huge, just in that short time, but it's definitely something that we want to continue for this school year.
Yeah, and a lovely way to continue making all those celebrations feel so personal. And Tarah, do you have any other tips for acknowledging students who are both with you and remote?
Yeah, and I just want to just piggyback on that, Leticia. I love that idea, because it's like the consistency and the routine, right? The students and the staff kind of know already what to expect and where to get this information. And that's kind of like how I would branch into the idea of like, when you're acknowledging students, whether it's with their work or just, getting to know them, making sure that they have a clear path for where to get that. Where do they get this information from? Where do they hear from their teacher? And like streamlining a platform, whether you're using Google Classroom or anything else more consistent across your district for an LMS, can really help our students and our families have access to that information. And whether that's finding, assignments or to-do lists, or even access to a calendar, like a calendar with birth dates on it, for example, too. And, a quick way to access Google Meets for those one-on-one or small group correspondence. Something I really love that we've been talking about in our district with acknowledging students and their work is utilizing Screencastify in a way that's going to be more personalized feedback, or just personalized like video correspondence. So talking about the idea of, making a little screencast video, dropping that link into student work or into their slides or their docs or through email, I think has a little bit more of a personal touch than just typing out some text. And we also are encouraging our staff to utilize the social emotional templates on Pear Deck to do kind of like, in the beginning of your lessons, just for those quick checks for teachers to gauge which students can benefit from a virtual check-in. There's so many ideas, right? But the most important thing is making that feedback loop consistent.
Absolutely. And thanks so much for sharing all of those ideas and ways to keep your students engaged. Let's transition into how you're facilitating conversations between students when they're not necessarily together in the same place. Patricia, would you mind starting with what are some of the ways that you're fostering that collaboration between peers so they can work together and learn from one another even while they're remote?
Yeah, definitely. Many teachers don't take advantage of that opportunity, and even face to face to gather them, and divide them in small groups and partners. But the more you do it in the classroom, the students start building relationships among them, and they even became very good friends. I mean, in the beginning they might not want to work together, but you create this culture where everybody helps each other, where everybody is helping each other, and then everybody now it becomes friend, and they have a good time in your class. So that's important for you too, because as a teacher you want them to be comfortable in that environment. So one of the things that I like doing is sharing collaborative documents. So assigning certain documents in groups and to collaborate on the same document or on the same slide at the same time. They obviously you already have set the standards and the for them to how they're going to participate, because and then I show them I know that who raised that or who added this or that, and they have fun with that because they realize that everything they do has a consequence. But then after that everything is fine, and they move on, and they just start collaborating. So another tool, Book Creator app, has a great tool for students to create a book together, so in a group. So those editing tools to work nicely remotely in a group. work fantastic. And obviously leveraging online discussions, making sure you provide discussion boards that connect with peers, learners, and help receiving invaluable feedback. So another tool would be like the station rotations. Those providing the playlist, the choice boards and menus to provide that opportunity for small groups to work together in a project. And there are incredible Google Slides templates out there with drawers and cabinets that work fantastic for the choice boards. So the opportunities out there are amazing. It's just a decision of the teacher. Yes, I will use maybe a group generator randomly tool. So then, the students don't feel that you put them in groups. But I mean, and they feel comfortable too, because they will randomly choose, and so that's the best way to form tools, the groups.
And Leticia, how about you? How have you kind of kept students engaging with one another through all the social distancing?
So last year we really wanted to keep going like this. We had this whole idea of like, how do we still create like a recess type of space for our students? So we tried using Google Chat. And the idea was like that we didn't want teachers to be part of it because we really wanted students to have like that real life experience. If they're outside on recess and they're running into, some conflict or things, we wanted them to learn how to like work that out. And so we still wanted our IAs to be part of that and instructional aides. And so we had them in charge of it. And then we had like a couple of parents who were in there too. That didn't go as planned as we really wanted to. So we had to pull that back. And so we've been brainstorming about like, how can we still want this space where all the third graders from our school, that they would have like a grade level space to still interact, because that's a missing part. And we know that we can do it within our classrooms, right? So for our littles, K2, they're using Seesaw. So they've got that interactive space in their classroom. And then for our Google Classroom, we have that space as well. But we wanted to do it grade level wide. So we've been brainstorming, like maybe we set up a Seesaw so that way all 150 of those first graders are in one space, and that like my admin and I and the teachers could also like keep an eye on it. But again, we wouldn't necessarily jump in right away to help solve some of the common recess mishaps, that we would be there, like teachable moments, and how do we still like monitor that. And at least it's a safe space. We don't want them to go to social media, but we want to do it where it's still a somewhat controlled environment, but we want to make sure that our students are staying safe, respectful, and responsible. So we've been talking about that. And then in terms of academics, our teachers are using a variety of platforms that allow for collaboration, like Padlet and Book Creator that you mentioned as well, Patricia, and then using slides and just Google Classroom, and taking like still having academics, but again, that space to share, offer feedback, and do those things that we were doing in 3D, but now that we can still, again, leveraging technology, like takes it to a whole nother level, and we can still engage it in a way that keeps our, students being those digital citizens that we know that they can be.
Tarah, I know you've got some additional great ideas. What are some other methods that you've tried to build that remote collaboration in your classroom?
Yeah, so I think like the hardest thing is, we always say our favorite tool is chart paper and sticky notes in our district. And the thinking about like how we're going to replicate that experience digitally in an authentic way really helps our planning, because in the beginning of the year when we're doing any type of collaboration with students, a lot of times it is with these like analog pieces. And, if we're kind of thinking out loud, like if we need a team consensus chart, what's going to look like that in a digital way, or in a way if we are in person with students, we're having them practice it in a digital context instead of using physical chart paper. And so a couple of tips I would suggest would be, hey, check out a couple of those Pear Deck template slides to see if that would allow for the type of discourse you're looking for. Again, always thinking with like, what do you want students to know and be able to do in our planning, right? And finding the tool that's going to best help with that collaboration. If you normally would do like a T-chart on a chart paper, try it on a Google Doc with a table with pre-created bullet points, or maybe you've made a couple copies of those for small groups to have access to for their own space to brainstorm. again, I feel like I keep looping back in with Screencastify, right? But, an added bonus to this, because we're always thinking about not just substituting, what we would do on paper in the digital sense, but how can you elevate it? You can ask students to drop in a Screencastify video on anything they're working on to walk through their thinking, get that metacognition going using some sentence stems and accountable talk. I think that there's a lot of opportunities for us. I even like the idea of having students collaborate. In the beginning of the year, they would normally make these little collages for all about me in different grade levels. Well, how can you do that digitally? A lot of different ways you can utilize Google Slides with this, with one student per slide, adding in images, and then boom, flip that into a Pear deck in like interactive slideshow. And a couple days later, you have an interactive name that classmate quiz if you drop in the text feature with the text Pear deck templates. So again, the bonus of these examples is that you can do them live in person, and you can also do them when you're not together. It's really just the choice that you have.
Yeah. And Frederick, what tricks do you have up your sleeve to continue facilitating the student collaboration?
I got nothing. No, I think a lot of it was covered. A lot of that, again, I'm going to go back to problem-based learning. Being able to have the kids hold each other accountable is going to be really helpful to, get them to collaborate together. I guess other tools, if we're talking tools specifically, I think what could be fun is using Screencastify's incorporation with Edpuzzle and creating Edpuzzles that you share out with the students. And I know it's not commonly thought of as something to do, but with Edpuzzle, being able to assign an Edpuzzle to a group of students and have them do the open-ended answer along with something you could have recorded yourself or something that the other students have created through Screencastify. But just getting more and more involvement, because let's be honest, on those hybrid days, we'll see them in 3D, but then when they are virtual, you can't be synchronous with them 24/7. However, they can be synchronous with each other when you're not creating and providing content. So the more things you can create to have them work together, the better this is going to be for everybody involved.
Sure. It sounds like all of you are really pulling out all the stops to keep your students working together, regardless of whether or not they're in person or remote or going back and forth between the two places. So now, even with all this amazing planning and engagement tips and best practices for collaboration, we know there are still going to be some things that just do not work out quite the way that we want them to. Leticia, would you mind starting with what are some challenges that you expect to face when trying to create those personal connections with your students? And how are you expecting to overcome them?
Well, especially since we are starting off with virtual learning where students are at home and so are teachers, we know that like an instant challenge is, if students are able to get on live, at the time that it's scheduled, especially if, siblings are sharing devices, or if, the internet, like when it comes to hardware, those type of things that we really can't control, but we're trying to do our best as teachers to be as accommodating and being flexible with that. So we know those things are right away. And so teachers are doing, I think, a very great job about setting up different times that, students can come back in to check with them, especially with our littles, because some of them have to work side by side with their parents. So, you've got that parent assistance as well. That becomes another challenge in that, we know that parents, are working, or they've got different things that they, that they're parents and they're adults and they have things that they have to take care of for their family. And so we also know that we have to be highly flexible while still setting our expectations. And it has to go hand in hand, just because their home has become an extra learning space and there's no separation anymore. And so we have to be highly knowledgeable about that, right? And make some adjustments. And then just for myself, again, because I'm not in the classroom, but I do get to go in and visit. I say visit, I get to go into Zooms, and one of my priorities is digital citizenship. So I actually go in and do the lessons with the students on Zoom or Google Meet, whichever platform the teacher is choosing to use. And then this year, my principal has worked it out so that way, I believe my schedule will be either every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks that I'm in every classroom for at least 30 minutes. And while, again, my focus is digital citizenship lessons, using the ones provided by Common Sense and also Pear and Google, and we're doing this all year long, just not like those 6 lessons and then it's a one and done kind of thing, but that I'm getting in there. And so for me, just establishing trust with the students, right? Like I have a trust already with teachers, but now the good thing is like students who were there last year will see me and know me. And so I could hope to like continue that relationship with them. But then I've got to build trust with them all over again because they've been home. And so really, I think Tarah talked about it, or Tarah, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. But like she really talked about like starting off with those activities where you're doing like these check-ins with the kids. And so you're doing things like, what's your favorite ice cream? And then I'm also answering. So that way I'm being transparent about who I am. And so we can make those connections together. So just really started off with establishing trust with them, getting into the classrooms on a rotation. And then the other thing too is we're starting with some of those lessons where we're asking that parents actually sit in as well with the students to do those digital citizenship lessons. So that way it's being reinforced. And that they're using the language that we're using. And so I'm working with PTA on how to do that as well. But we recognize, the ones that we know right away. And then we're also trying to stay in tune with the ones that we are missing by like surveying and talking to parents and talking to kids. That's the other thing too. So we're trying different things.
Absolutely. And Tarah, how are you hoping to facilitate respect or deal with disrespect when students are only online part of the time?
Yeah, I feel like this is a good question, right? Because there's a lot of things that can go awry with using digital tools. But I would say, this should always circle back to the norms you co-create with students. And I cannot stress that enough. Remember, like circling back to start the year with relationships and have them co-create norms with you. And if you've established that together, it's something that isn't just done once and then you drop it and move on to, the academics. I feel like our theme for this panel was what Leticia said, like the culture eats standards for breakfast, right? So if you have these norms established, students should ideally know what the expectations are for that classroom, whether it's in that traditional or virtual sense. And as you're checking in on these a lot, you can use like accountable talk stems to really get the students to practice how they should respond to one another and how they should praise one another if they're active listening in a social distance way, or if they're actively listening to each other virtually through video conferencing. And as we're building that awareness and talking about what active listening looks like through a screen, we're building those habits. And, we can't just say like the disrespect, if we establish norms, there will be no bad behavior. We have to plan for what might happen in these spaces. And how can you use the norms you built together to create better understandings of what happens if somebody is disrespectful in this space? What class building activities could you come back to do to address these behaviors? Just like if we saw something happen in person at recess that was disrespectful, we would address those as a class when we would be back in the room. So even looking at that within the digital context, can you consider role playing or brainstorming and consensus building to better check their understanding and revise the norms that you've created and add that to your management plan? I think I hear a lot of like if-then prompts that might come to mind here, right? If you've done that and you've established those conversations over time and a student still is disrespectful in your virtual space, I think that, again, Screencastify would be a great tool for the teacher to provide a visual of the screen to share with guardians and the students to address the behavior. And then you can ask the student to respond back in the same format with an if-then plan. And I like that idea being even generated with students so they know if it comes to that point, you will receive this type of video correspondence from me as your teacher, so that there is, again, an understanding for the parents to know if something was inappropriately said on Google Classroom, they have an understanding of why a teacher would be reaching out to the student for something like that. So again, just going back to those norms that you create is going to be really important for establishing that.
Absolutely. And Frederick, how are you hoping to combat social isolation in this online setting, especially for some of your younger students?
Me or no? The way I've been doing it is doing stuff like this. But for our littles, I think it's important to definitely have that conversation with the parents, right? The students are used to being able to see their friends, and hopefully they're unable to do that right now. Their parents aren't taking them somewhere to have conversations in person. So what I would like to do is be able to have that conversation with the parents that says during the day, they're using this device that either we've provided or you've provided to communicate with us to get this stuff done. But it's okay for them to use this device to chat with their friends. This is going to be important. I have two children, soon to be 10-year-old girl going on 20, and a 15-year-old boy, who, when this happened, my son was fine because he has his phone, right? He was able to communicate with everybody. But my 9-year-old daughter really missed out on that social piece. Thankfully, there are lots of apps that are available for them to be able to chat, and you can only use them through me okaying the people that they're allowed to talk with. So she's not only gotten to stay in touch with her friends from school, but she's gotten to meet a lot of the children of my friends and have maybe only seen them a couple times in person, but now have formed some pretty good relationships with them. And it's going to be very important for the parents to help facilitate this. I don't want to put a lot of responsibility for this on the parents, but in order to keep those kids socially engaged, there's, especially with the littles, there's going to need to be some permissions granted to them that we've probably never considered before as parents, or they've ever had to consider. So frankly, I put this problem in the parents' lap. Sorry, but that my theory is that's what needs to happen.
Sure, or just parents as partners in combating that isolation. And Patricia, what are some additional challenges that you're kind of planning for this fall, and how are you gearing up to take those on?
Well, it has happened to me in the past where I do not see students participating. But it's very important to first do not lose faith on those students. I have students, for example, who did not turn anything the first week of the e-learning, but then I provided a fun optional task. And one was a Genially breakout room, and the other one was creating a TikTok video. And guess what? Guess what happened? Those students chose to complete that optional learning activity that week. So I learned to create that option and choice for the students because they all have different learning styles. And the way that we can enrich the multimedia with personalization, we're going to be, the best way to provide them with suitable learning resources through the multimedia or through other means and through the media that they are already using in their everyday days and their lives. So definitely helping them, those students, creating a space for weekly updates and celebrations to acknowledge the students' efforts, like that little effort that he took to complete the optional task, but also to provide the space for those who go beyond and above the regular task. And it can be shared with the parents. It could be just a Jamboard, a Google slide with a fancy template and design, or an editable and accessible to all Padlet or a Wakelet, where you share it with parents as well. So everybody, feel comfortable communicating with you, but at the same time, they are being acknowledging for their efforts and for the learning that is happening in your classrooms.
Well, I know that all of our audience members very much appreciate these fantastic examples of both creativity and innovation as you are planning to address all of these challenges. And just as a final thought for each of those audience members, are there any pieces of advice that you can share for educators as they start the school year in this hybrid learning model? Tarah, would you like to go first? What can you offer?
Yeah, I would just say, to maximize your time, pick a couple tools that you're going to use consistently and build them into relationship team building activities and just rinse and repeat, right? Have them get really comfortable in the tool and really get comfortable knowing each other, because again, you have to establish that safe environment at the beginning of the year. And part of that safety is feeling good with using the tool. And yeah, just, make sure there's a consistent platform being used. That's really all I can say for advice there.
And Frederick, what would you add on? What are a piece of advice you might share?
I think a couple things. One is give yourself a little bit of grace. This is all new for a lot of us, and there will be I'm not going to forecast there's going to be a lot of mistakes, but there's going to probably be a lot of stumbles as we get going with this. And one of the ISTE standards for educators is to co-learn a tool with the students. 100% that's going to be happening right now. And that's fine, because what we need to show them is we're still learners, and also that life and a mistake or a failure happens, you move forward. It's not that big a deal. It's not the end of the world. And so I'm not recommending that you make mistakes, but we're gonna anyway. So it's probably okay to give yourself some grace and acknowledge it, and help the students learn from it.
Absolutely. And Patricia, what would you add on? What are some advice you might leave the audience members with?
Definitely make your course interactive. Use the amazing online tech tools that we have close by. So, and as Frederick said, just try one at a time, but it needs to be a intentional and consistent task of professional growing and learning on your part. Maybe try one a month, every 2 weeks, and then tell your students, I'm trying this new tool. Please let me know at the end of the class your opinion, what we could do better, and what you thought of it. And the students will feel more open and willing to try new things themselves if they see us taking those risks, making those mistakes, and enjoying the process with them.
Absolutely. And Leticia, end it for us. What final piece of advice would you offer all of our audience?
Well, I definitely agree with everything that the panelists have said, and I'll add my two. I would say the first one is, especially with these various tech platforms, giving our students opportunities to share their voice and having choice in how they're doing that. And that definitely can come through with all of these different platforms, whether it's, using Book Creator, Screencastify, Flipgrid, Padlet, whatever that is. Definitely give them choice in that. And we'll definitely see them flourish in ways that we can't even imagine. And then I think the second part that I really want to say is really set aside, whether it's every third week or every fourth week, whatever that is, but set up so that way you have individual time slots to meet with students if you are meeting virtually, and make it so that way maybe it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or maybe let the students choose, but give them some time so that way you can chat with them one-on-one to check in on them and let them check in on you and have those real conversations, so that way they can talk about hopefully things outside of just content and learning, but what they're experiencing as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again to our wonderful panelists, Tarah Tesmer, Frederick Ballew, Patricia Flores, Leticia Citizen, for opening up your classrooms and your thought processes, for preparing for this back to school season, and just continuing to build that wonderful classroom culture in a hybrid learning setting. I'm Laura Litton, and the absolute best luck to all of you as you continue searching for those innovative ways to connect with your students in these challenging times. Thanks again.